Quite a lot of people ask me about watercolour pencils and what they are for and how you would use them. And I think what I would say is I once did a complete painting, quite a large one, in watercolour pencils. And it took me a very long time. It was quite successful. But over the years, I have decided that the way that it's better for me to use them is to use them as an addition to my watercolour paints. Now these are just Stedler, but I've got several. I've got Caran d'Ache and so on. And they're, personally, if you're going to buy some coloured pencils, I would suggest you got watercolour pencils, because then you have the choice of using them just as a coloured pencil, which you can, or then changing them into a watercolour. So you can use them like you would ordinarily use coloured pencils. And that's a completely different video in itself, how to actually work in coloured pencil, because you work lightly, you don't press on too hard to start with. You can mix colours. You can see where the two overlay that you're getting more of a green. This is not the best paper actually for just coloured pencil work. It's better if you have a smooth paper, but that's not what I'm actually demonstrating today. So I'm just going to share with you a few things that I use over and over again, or a few techniques that I use over and over again with watercolour pencils. So if you do use them like ordinary watercolour pencils and then you were to wet them, let's see what happens. Hopefully I'm right in thinking that you will get a nice green. So that was just with mixing blue and yellow together. And you know, you can move it about and make it paler. So you can drag that out. You can use them like a colour pencil and then you can wet them. So that's the first way. What you don't do, some people have actually said to me, is that, do I dip them in the water? No, you don't. That would eventually ruin your pencils, so you need to actually use them like a colour pencil and then wet them afterwards. They're very, very useful like that, just for little bits, little areas. If you need the detail, if you need to work in detail, you can do it in detail and then you can just wet it afterwards. So they're great for that. What I tend to use them for, the three different things. One is to actually spatter with them. So let me show you that. I'll use a different colour. And I use this all the time. So if you want a little bit of texture on your watercolour painting after you've done it, so for example, rocks, or trying to think of something else, splashes in water, little flowers in a field to make it look like a meadow, then these are great. And what you do is you just have a wet brush and then you just flick over like that. Now I tend to move it around a bit, because if you just do it the same way all the time, you get like lines, can you see? But then if you move it around a bit. Now let's see what happens if I use a bigger brush. I've never actually tested this out, but let's just see if you use a bigger brush, if you get a bigger dot. Maybe I'll use another colour for that to see. Let's use this burgundy here. Maybe a little bit, but I'm not sure. No, I don't think it makes an awful lot of difference whether you use a smaller brush or a larger brush. But you can see how that would build up a lovely texture. Obviously, the problem with it is that you've no control over where it goes. So if you wanted it in a specific area, you would have to mask off, either with bits of paper, masking fluid, something, so that you could contain these splashes. A more controlled way, but it gives a different technique, is if you use a craft knife with your coloured pencil. So let's just say, for example, you're wanting to paint a brick. So what I'm going to do is well, actually, first of all, what I think I will do is I will just draw myself a brick with the coloured pencils just as they are. And let's put a little bit of colour in there, just quickly. And maybe a little bit of a green, say, as well. You get lots of different colours in bricks. Maybe just put little bits here and there. And then maybe some reddy bits. Maybe even some orangey bits. Yeah, so you could spend as much time as you wanted on this part of it. And then I'm going to wet that. And those colours should nicely run together a little bit. But then before it dries, to add more texture, if you then scrape, let's do a few different colours. That's like a brown. This is like that green again. You've got to do it before it dries, that's the thing. And a bit of a red. Let's say something like that, and then you blow, then you've got some really nice texture on there. And that would work for bricks, stonework, rocks, you know, a whole host of things. If at the end of that you think, actually, there's little bits of that I don't like, then there's nothing stopping you just going back in and squashing a few of those little bits. Like that. But another thing, the final thing that I will just share with you is how I use it for doing outdoor work. So say, for example, I was going out sketching and I wanted to take minimal equipment with me. I would make myself a palette. The colours that I use most of the time are alizarin crimson. So this is something similar. And then I would make a little square and I'd press on quite a lot so you've got quite a lot of colour on there using alizarin crimson. Something like that. And then I use ultramarine blue a lot. So I would then do myself another square, and you can change the size of your squares. Probably wonder what I'm doing here, but all will be revealed. And then I'd use something like a cadmium yellow. So these are the three primary colours. And then I have a couple of added colours. One would be a lighter blue, cerulean. And then I would use something like a burnt sienna, like a brown, a mid-brown. Like so that. I would do those squares, and then I would take a little pot of water in a brush, or you could even buy those brushes that have got water in them. I don't actually have one, but they're like a brush and they've got water in the cylinder. So you could just take that. And then what you would do, so say for example, you wanted to do a sky and you were looking at a nice landscape. I do a lot of wet in wet, so let's just wet an area. Then I would take a little bit of this off, and I would use this like you would use pans in a paint box. Or you might want a little bit of a paler blue. And then obviously I would let that dry, but then you might want some hills of some description. I mean, I'm rushing this. This is just really to show you the process. You can use a little bit of blue so you can see what's happening here by putting that ultramarine on. It's creating a grey. Now, people who have been in my class, they will know that I talk a lot about creating your own blacks and greys by mixing blues and browns together. So essentially, that's just what I'm doing here. Well, then you could have, I don't know, bits of grass or something like that. So you think, well, how you do that? Because you've not got a green. But just like you would with any other paint, you could mix them. And if you use a different blue, you would get a different green. You'd get like a limey green, as opposed to a bottle green. So it would really only be for like thumbnail sketches, so that you've got an idea of the colours that you want to add, and then you could come back to your studio or to your house and you could then do a bigger version, but at least you've got like a colour code of what you want to go where. So essentially from these colours, just like it would be ordinarily, with my watercolour paints, if these colours are good, because if you mix this red with this blue, you will get a purple. If you mix this red with this yellow, you will get an orange. If you mix this blue with this yellow, you'll get a lime green. But if you mix this blue with a yellow, you will get a darker green. See the difference? And then if you mix this blue with the brown, you should get a grey. So you can see from those 5 colours, you can get most things. Obviously you use them on their own, but the mixtures, you can get purples, you can get greens, you can get oranges, you can get greys. So they would be the 5 that I would take out if I was doing any outdoor sketching. So that's it really in a nutshell, that you can use coloured pencils just like ordinary pencils, ordinary coloured pencils, or you could flick with them and create texture in that way. You could scrape with them with a craft knife and create texture in that way. That's more controllable. Or you can create your own palette, and then you could go out sketching, and you don't have to take all your paints with you. You just have to be a little bit organised and do it the day before. And you can create some really nice little thumbnail sketches just from that, either from a little bit of water and a brush, or one of these special aqua brushes, I think they're called. So I hope that's answered a few of your questions. Yeah, so I would just suggest, if ever you want to get some coloured pencils, then I would get watercolour ones. And my favourite are Caran d'Ache, but there's some very good ones out there. Just make sure they're a good make, and have fun.